There is a dangerous habit among believers when it comes to measuring the grace of God. We look at our lives, we count our comforts, we measure our physical health, we look at the stability of our finances. Based on these visible markers, we decide whether or not God has been good to us. If the prayer is answered exactly as we requested, we feel favored. If the path is smooth, we feel protected. But what happens when the road is difficult? What happens when the answer is delayed? Or when the comfort is stripped away? You may be measuring your spiritual life by the wrong scale. What if some of the greatest blessings God has allowed into your life are the ones you almost never count? We tend to look for the spectacular. We wait for the dramatic intervention. Yet Padre Pio's life forces us to ask a different question, not how impressive a blessing looks, but whether it actually brings us closer to Christ. And that means some blessings may already be part of your everyday life, even if you have stopped recognizing them. There are three specific realities that many Catholics possess without ever recognizing their true value. One of them may occasionally make you uncomfortable. Another may be so familiar that you hardly notice it anymore. And the third may have entered your life before you were old enough to understand what you were receiving. If you have even one of these three things in your life, you may be far more blessed than you have realized. And the third is especially powerful because, for countless Catholics, it began working in their souls long before they ever chose it for themselves. But before we begin, we need to make one thing clear. Being blessed does not mean being spiritually superior to anyone else, and lacking one of these things does not mean God has forgotten you or abandoned your family. God's love cannot be measured by comfort, possessions, health, or how easy your life has been. Here, blessing does not mean a reward for good behavior. It can be a gift of grace placed within your life that, when recognized and received with faith, helps draw your heart away from distraction and back toward God. This is one reason Padre Pio remains so relevant to Catholics today. He directs our attention away from appearances and back toward what ultimately matters. Whether our lives are leading us toward Christ. Before we continue, write this simple prayer in the comments. Lord, open my eyes to the blessings I have overlooked. Write it as a sincere request to recognize the gifts God may already have placed in your life. Some blessings make you feel good immediately. They bring instant relief or sudden joy. But the first blessing we must recognize often does the exact opposite. This one may irritate you first. Consider the people who surround you. You likely have acquaintances who agree with everything you say. You have colleagues who keep conversations pleasant and superficial. But do you have someone who loves you enough to tell you the truth? Do you have someone who warns you when you are wrong? Someone who perceives when you're making a poor decision and refuses to remain silent? Someone who does not agree with your complaints just to keep the peace? Have you ever become angry with someone for speaking a hard word to you, only to realize months later that they were telling you exactly what you needed to hear? There is a real difference between constant criticism and someone who loves you enough to tell you what you may not want to hear. Cruelty is not correction. Control is not love. The life of Padre Pio reflects the seriousness of truth in the Christian life. Authentic Christian truth is never meant to humiliate a person, but to help the soul move closer to God. A bitter spirit will tear you down under the disguise of honesty, but a person who can speak a difficult truth without humiliating you, a person who desires your ultimate good more than they desire your immediate approval, is a gift that should not be taken for granted. Why do we resist this? Pride makes correction difficult to accept. We prefer the company of those who validate our flaws because it requires no interior change. We want to be comforted in our errors rather than challenged to abandon them. Padre Pio's life was never centered on spiritual comfort alone. Holiness asks for humility before the truth. Padre Pio's life reminds us that genuine growth cannot be built on constant approval. Christian charity does not simply tell us what is comfortable to hear. At times, it calls us to face a truth we would rather avoid. Padre Pio's life keeps this uncomfortable reality before us. Becoming closer to God often means allowing our excuses to be challenged. The person who helps you see something you were refusing to see may not feel like a blessing in that moment, but truth can become a gift precisely because it asks something of you. Think about how rare that kind of relationship becomes as the years pass. Many people learn exactly what topics to avoid with us, what opinions not to challenge, and what words will keep everything comfortable. But the person who still cares enough to risk an awkward conversation may be offering something far more valuable than agreement, They are refusing to let comfort become more important than your good. The book of Proverbs reveals this reality clearly. Faithful are the wounds of a friend. Profuse are the kisses of an enemy. A person who only tells you what you want to hear protects your feelings. A person who lovingly tells you the truth may protect something far more important. They may help you recognize that you are moving away from God before you would have admitted it yourself. If you have someone in your life who risks your temporary anger to secure your permanent good, you possess a treasure that many people spend their entire lives searching for. One of the greatest gifts we can receive is not constant approval, but the kind of honesty that keeps us from becoming comfortable with what separates us from God. But the first blessing has a voice. It speaks. It confronts. The second blessing may bless you without saying a single word. You may have walked through the same church doors hundreds of times. You know exactly how the heavy wood feels against your hand. You know where the holy water font is located. You know which floorboards creak. You know exactly where you prefer to sit. You know how the silence sounds in those quiet minutes before Mass begins. You know the scent of the incense embedded in the walls, the flicker of the sanctuary lamp, the way the light filters through a specific window on a Sunday morning. And precisely because you know all of this so well, you may have stopped seeing it. What we see every week can become the easiest thing to take for granted. We are not speaking of mysticism here. This is not about a building possessing a secret energy or offering a hidden sign. It is simply the gift of having a place that repeatedly calls you back to God. Think about the places you move through every week. There are places where you must work. There are places where you buy groceries. There are places where you pay bills, where you argue, where you solve family crises, where you are constantly required to respond to the demands of other people. Your mind is pulled in 1,000 directions by the anxieties of modern life. But there is also a place whose sole purpose is to make you remember. When you step into that familiar church, or even when you kneel in that specific corner of your bedroom where you keep your Bible and a crucifix, that familiar setting can remind you of truths that are easy to forget during the rest of the week. That place exists to remind you. God exists. You are not the center of everything. Your life has an eternal direction. Padre Pio spent his life centered on prayer, the altar, and the sacraments. His priorities challenge us to ask what still has the power to pull our own attention back toward God. And this helps us recognize the value of having a real place in our lives where distraction gives way to remembrance, where we can pause, pray, and return our attention to God. For Padre Pio, Catholic faith was inseparable from a life oriented toward prayer and the sacraments. That is why an ordinary church can become so important in a believer's life. Not because the building itself guarantees an extraordinary experience, but because it repeatedly places Christ, worship, and eternity back before our eyes. The psalmist understood this ache for the sanctuary. Psalm 84 declares, "For a day in your courts is better than 1,000 elsewhere. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of wickedness." The blessing is not that extraordinary things happen every time you enter that church. You may sit in your pew and feel entirely distracted. You may struggle to pray. You may feel dry, tired, and overwhelmed by the week. The blessing may simply be that there is still a place in your life that reminds you where to return. When so much in life changes, having somewhere that consistently points you back to God becomes more valuable than we often realize. You may not realize how precious that is until life becomes unsettled. A job changes. A family situation becomes complicated. Someone you love moves away. The routines that once gave structure to your week disappear. Yet those familiar church doors are still there. The altar is still there. The prayers of the church are still there. In a life where so much changes, being reminded where you belong can itself become a quiet blessing. If reflections like this help you rediscover the richness of the Catholic faith through the spiritual example of Padre Pio, subscribe to the channel. But the third blessing is different from the first two. A place can remind you where to return, but the third may be the reason you ever learned where to return in the first place. Think back. Think about your earliest memories of faith. Who first taught you to make the sign of the cross? Who was the first person to bring you through the doors of a church? Who taught you the words to the Our Father? Who spoke the name of Jesus inside your home? Who taught you to bow your head and give thanks before eating a meal? Who placed you in contact with the reality of faith? Perhaps that person was not perfect, Perhaps they had their own severe flaws. Perhaps you walked away from their teaching for decades. Perhaps in your youth you considered their devotion to be outdated, unnecessary, or overly strict. But some gifts are received long before their value is understood. You may have spent years thinking that your faith was something you discovered on your own. You may believe your spiritual life is the result of your own reading, your own searching, your own adult decisions. But perhaps someone was planting it in you before you even knew what you were receiving. For many, this was a mother or a father. For others, it was a grandmother, whose rosary beads seemed to be permanently woven into her fingers. It may have been a grandfather who knelt by his bed, a parish priest who spoke with genuine conviction, a catechist who taught you a prayer that you still remember 50 years later, or a godparent who took their role seriously. The example of Padre Pio also reminds us how much faith can be transmitted through ordinary people whose influence may seem small at the time but becomes clearer years later. You may not even remember when you first heard about Jesus because faith was already present in your home before you were old enough to understand it. Not everyone receives faith through a healthy family or an ideal childhood. Many people grow up in homes where faith was absent, conflicted, or rarely practiced. For some, that person appeared much later. It may have been a faithful friend in college, a spouse who patiently modeled Christian virtue, or a neighbor whose quiet charity provoked a question in your heart. Regardless of when they appeared, the reality remains the same. The life of Padre Pio reminds Catholics that faith is not meant to stop with us. What we receive must eventually become something we live and pass on. God often brings faith into our lives through other people. St. Paul gives us a clear example of faith being passed from one generation to another when he wrote to his young disciple in the second letter to Timothy, "I am reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now I am sure dwells in you as well." Timothy did not invent his faith. He inherited a seed. Padre Pio's witness points to something important here. Inherited faith must eventually become a faith we personally live. A rosary handed to you by your grandmother cannot pray in your place. A parent's devotion cannot replace your own response to God. But the faith you witnessed through another person can give you a starting point, a language and a memory to return to when you finally begin seeking Christ for yourself. Perhaps the person who planted faith in you is no longer alive. And perhaps you understand today what you could not possibly understand when they were standing beside you. They may have worried about you. They may have prayed tearful rosaries for your return to the church. They may never have seen everything that seed eventually became. They planted in hope, trusting the soil to God. And now there may be someone watching you in the exact same way. It can be humbling to realize that someone's faith influenced you long after you stopped remembering the words they once said. A prayer learned as a child can return decades later. A gesture you barely noticed can suddenly make sense. A lesson you resisted when you were young can become precious when life finally teaches you why it mattered. Your child, your grandchild, your niece or nephew, a younger co-worker, a friend who notices how you treat people, how you speak about your faith, and the place you give God in your ordinary life. One of your greatest blessings may be a faith you did not build from nothing. Someone placed the first stone before you even understood what was being built, and today you are holding the stones for the next generation. Padre Pio did not become meaningful to later generations simply because people remembered his name. His witness continues to matter because it points beyond himself toward Christ. And something similar can happen in a much smaller way within your own family. The faith you live today may become part of how someone else learns to seek God tomorrow. You may never know which ordinary act of faith another person will remember 30 years from now. What feels ordinary to you today may become the example another person reaches for when they are trying to understand what faithful living actually looks like. Maybe blessing is not always the dramatic answer you were waiting for. Sometimes it is a person who refuses to flatter you, choosing instead to protect your soul with the truth. Sometimes it is a familiar place, a quiet pew, a local parish that keeps reminding you of God when the world demands your constant attention. And sometimes it is a seed of faith planted so early that you forgot there was ever a time before it. Truth, a place to return. Faith received from another. None of these gifts need to look extraordinary from the outside. In fact, that is exactly why they are so easy to overlook. They become part of the background of life until one day you realize how different your journey might have been without them. Why does having even one of these make you more blessed than you realize? Because these realities do not promise earthly wealth. They do not eliminate physical illness. They do not automatically resolve complex family disputes. They do not produce constant emotional highs. They do something far more profound. Padre Pio helps us see that a blessing is valuable not only because we possess it, but because of where it leads us. Its real value becomes clear when it draws us toward Christ. These three things continually direct your life back to Christ. They can correct you when you are wrong, remind you where to return, and preserve a faith that might otherwise have been forgotten. And this is where Padre Pio ultimately points us. Every blessing finds its deepest purpose when it leads the soul closer to Christ. This is why some gifts become more valuable only with time. Years may pass before you understand why a certain person mattered, why a familiar parish became precious, or why a simple prayer learned in childhood remained somewhere inside you. Padre Pio gives us a reason to take these ordinary gifts seriously, instead of waiting for God to act only through something dramatic. Perhaps tonight you will remember someone you have not thought about in years, the person who first taught you a prayer, the person who brought you to church, the person who quietly showed you that God mattered above all else. Maybe you never thanked them, maybe you no longer can, but you can thank God for what He allowed you to receive through them. And perhaps someone years from now will remember something equally simple that they first learned by watching you. Leave a comment below as a simple act of gratitude. Lord, thank you for the blessings I almost missed. And send this reflection to someone who helped bring you closer to God, even if they never realized they did. Let them know that their faithfulness bore fruit in your life. Some of the greatest blessings in your life may not be things you received yesterday. They may be gifts you have carried for so long that you forgot they were gifts at all.